Hello and welcome to Deep Impact, a proud member of the Doof Network where we dive deep into Wildbow's most second work, 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we pick up with Blake alone, sort of, in a room with Pose, his senses being assaulted basically on all fronts.
Yeah, what I love about how this is done, though, is we open with all these like disgusting descriptions of the room and like all the filthy animals. And then it's the second paragraph where it's like Pooh's effect is almost this sort of afterthought. And it's like, yes, like Pooh's and his effect are a consideration, but also this place is just fucking gross.
Yeah, I like that this is the dialed down version of what it must be like to be around Pose, right?
Yeah.
Which is fun. This whole chapter is basically a long drawn out contract negotiation between Blake and Pose. And it's a lot more engaging than that sentence sounded.
Yeah, I don't know. I flickered back and forth a bit as I was sort of reading this. Like, I was enjoying all of the sort of bit by bit like semantics and mind games and the sort of puzzle solving aspect. But there were definitely moments where Blake would sort of take a step back where I was like, no, come on. Like, I got to find out about Rose and we've got like all this other stuff to get to. So yeah, like I was kind of conflicted as I was reading this chapter in a way, because I was enjoying it. Yes. But there were definitely moments where I was like, oh, come on.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, I think this is probably the chapter where the least tangibly happens to progress the story. But I love, one of the reasons I like Pact so much is because of all the like word negotiations in it, and this is obviously an example of that.
Definitely. Yeah. Like I've been reading some other stuff recently as well, and there's just something missing when you have to account for people lying. Like you can't just take for granted that they're telling the truth, but they're trying to sneak past you. It's such a great mechanic.
Yeah. We mentioned how Blake feels a lot more protected from Pose's like aura. His extensive suiting up from last chapter has had some effect, regardless of whether it's like actual or kind of confidence-based placebo.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically exactly what he did to his apartment as well. So yeah, he's in trouble if it doesn't work. So this is a good sign.
Yeah, actually, it's almost certainly not confidence-based when we get this line from Blake's train of thought. I was going to fuck this up on some level. It was practically inevitable. I just hoped I could reduce it down to a level I could manage. So he's really not super confident about going into this.
I don't know. I've definitely gone into situations with that mindset before.
I don't know. It was practically inevitable that he fucks it up is pretty harsh. I mean,
I mean, with all this going on, I don't think that's an unhealthy mindset really to have. Like, and I mean, I guess we see by the end he was right, but I think he did a pretty good job of minimizing the issues.
Yeah. Pose and Blake start negotiating the finer points of their deal, basically just talking out what the terms of this are going to be. And it's clear that Pose is interested in the deal, but is really trying to get every advantage in it that he can kind of wrangle out of it.
Yeah, which I mean, he's a demon and he's kind of a dick about it, and etc. But I mean, this is essentially a business arrangement between strangers where they're not really trying to form a long-term working relationship. I mean, that's honestly just kind of a reasonable, if slightly dickish, like stance to take. I'm not really going to fault him for that.
Yeah, totally. This chapter kind of breaks down as Pooh's kind of trying a tactic of negotiation, and Blake strikes back against it, right? And there are some interesting things in here, but it's a cyclical conversation of kind of attack and defense rather than like any real wild plot developments, at least up until the end.
Yeah, it's like the inverse, I guess, of all these other negotiations Blake's been a part of, because he's really the one, like at the end of the day, he knows that Pooh's really wants to take this deal. And so regardless of like the minute by minute play, overall, he's the one who kind of has the power. And that's almost the opposite. We've seen in the ones with the Briar Girl where Blake starts off on the back foot and he thinks he's found the upper hand, and then it gets like slapped away from him. And that's basically kind of what happens to Poos multiple times in this deal as well, is Blake lets him think he has the upper hand and then takes it away. And we find out there's a bit of a twist on that at the end, but like overall, it's kind of the inverse in that Blake, for the first time ever, sort of has the power and kind of knows it and is using it.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point that I hadn't really considered. It definitely is Blake who kind of feels very confident in his position. I mean, I guess that's how it kind of comes off. He obviously isn't super confident, but he does have a lot of the power in this negotiation, which is a different dynamic.
Yeah, there are a number of times where he specifically falls back on the fact that he knows that at the end of the day, Poos just want this. And that's something I don't think he's ever had before in a negotiation.
Yeah, leverage.
Yeah.
So a fun kind of note of how this goes that I really like is Blake basically consciously and sometimes subconsciously is trying to emulate how he thinks Rose would behave in these situations. He keeps kind of taking these little beats to remind himself how Rose would act in this way. It's great. I love it.
The best one is definitely when he sort of accuses Poos of being small, and Poos is like, "You think I'm small?" And he's like, No, I just think you could be bigger. And then he's like, "Thanks, Rose." Like, that was sort of a classic Rose line.
Classic Rose, yeah.
And I mean, Rose mentions scattered all throughout this chapter. Like, there's a bit at the start where he's like, "Oh my god, I'm alone. Fuck. Just in case you ever, as soon as you sort of start to forget Rose, Blake will sort of bring her into his narration. Just, I'm hating this mystery, but I'm loving it. It's so good.
Yeah. So Poos does have a trap here that he lays for Blake that works, that Blake walks into. But I like, even so early on, Blake kind of figures out what the trap is, but just doesn't quite join the dots on it. He makes this thought, which is, not unless the trap was to throw so many terms and ideas at me that I'd stop being careful. Which basically is what it seems like Poos is trying to do, kind of distract Blake from the one key piece of information in there. And it works. Blake misses the fact that when Poos is bound, he will kind of lose his ability to control all these animals and leave Blake surrounded by a bunch of hungry, mangy things.
Yeah, but at the same time, it also doesn't work, because there are a number of pitfalls that Blake sees coming and closes up. So it's like, it's a weapon that Poos employs, and it's hard to say how directly, but it clearly has some sort of effect, even when Blake is aware of it. I also like this bit sort of early on where they're sort of negotiating, and Blake sort of looks at Craig Doubt and is like, did he make some sort of mistake that opened himself up to Poos? Like, does Poos pick on weak people? And where's he going to go after this guy? And then he sort of thinks about himself. And he's like, wow, I'm pretty weak too.
It's a fun little moment. Blake clearly makes the thought of, well, Poos likes weak people. And then, as the reader, you immediately make the thought of, oh no, he's going to think himself, isn't he? And then he does. It's perfect. So Blake and Poos kind of negotiate enough of the terms of the deal that they are happy to actually sign it, actually make a real contract that they can sign. And so Blake kind of starts drafting the contract, and they start hammering out a bunch of like minutia details about terms.
Yeah, and I love all these bits where Blake is like, okay, and I just want to clarify this and this and this, and Poos is just always sort of being like, fine, like, point conceded.
He's so grumpy.
Yeah, as just, and especially as Blake is closing traps that Poos has left for him, he's just always like, oh, fine.
Yeah. And we get a fun little a pronunciation confirmation here, with the quote, Poos, given of the Marquis Andras, both of the fifth choir, feral and foul, and Blake kind of asks him to spell it. And it's P-A-U-Z, rhymes with ooze. So obviously it's Poos, everybody, and we can kind of stop that argument now.
I mean, I had a good laugh at this bit here, just because obviously the pronunciation of Poos or Poos has been a bit of a topic just in our podcast and especially in the Discord server. And then to see this sort of confirmation sitting so close to the word Marquis
Mm.
the parahuman pronunciation nightmare was just a hilarious coincidence / troll by Wildbow. I don't know which one, but it's hilarious either way.
I wonder how intentional it is that there's Poos and Marquis right there. Anyway, it must be intentional because this chapter is very like meticulous, right? This is a chapter about details and slowly negotiating details. I can't imagine that was an accident.
Yeah, well, I guess especially because Wildbow was probably assuming that everyone was pronouncing it wrong, because I don't know how many people got to poos or pa-oos without the detail that it rhymes with ooze. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. There's a quote I want to read off here, which is just a great moment. So, as Blake's kind of writing out the contract, there are a bunch of animals kind of swarming around, and he kind of gets gets suspicious of Poos that these animals are going to try and interfere. So Poos kind of scampers this mouse that's getting close, and we get this quote: "The mouse scampered off, running off of the table. The thump it made as it hit the ground caught me off guard. Mice were light enough that they wouldn't necessarily make a sound like that. I leaned to one side and saw that it had broken its neck in the fall, head first." Like, man, disruption of the natural order. Like, there's no other way to say it, right? It's just so weird. This mouse jumps off the table head first and kills itself, and it's just like, why?
Yeah, the whole thing is just so unnecessarily barbaric.
Yeah.
It's great. And I'm struggling to remember now, but there are moments where Blake notices that the animals are all sort of backing off, and I think it's all after this. So this might sort of be part of that tipping point where Poos tries to get the animals out of Blake's mind as a threat, and part of that is maybe showing that he's so willing to kill them. I don't know.
Yeah.
I might be reaching there, but this I think is part of the plan.
Yeah, I think if this doesn't give Poos the idea, he's definitely had it by this point where he now kind of lets the animals all back off and get outside of Blake's, out of sight, out of mind, basically.
Yeah.
To spring the trap for him later. While they're kind of narrowing down the terms, actually, Blake spots a different trap that Poos has set for him. They talk about the definition of harm, and Blake kind of defines it so that Poos can't bring harm. Poos or nobody he works with can bring harm to Blake or any of his, friends or family. And the definition of harm involves, like, none of my power or nothing by my hand or claw or something like that.
I think it's by my hand.
Yeah, that's right. And so Blake kind of spots that Poos could, like, I don't know, bite somebody or do something that's not quite using his hand. And it's a great little bit where Blake kind of spots this and puts it up his sleeve for later, and then he pulls it out later with a nice little twist, and Poos gets pretty angry that he's, like, calling him out on it. It's a great fun beat.
Yeah, goddamn euphemisms. Like, it'd be so easy to fall for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't think the brilliant part here is just that Blake noticed it. I reckon it's how he uses it. Because what he does
totally.
is he doesn't tell Poos that he's figured it out. He sort of uses the fact that Poos is trying to make him not realize it to sort of get Poos to rush through the next bit of the contract.
Yeah.
Whereas, if he told him right from the start, Poos would have then been belligerent through this whole next section. Whereas Blake kind of inverts the tables on Poos, gets Poos to rush through it, and then he's like, okay, and now let's go back to this bit, and closes the loophole. It's really well done.
So perfectly executed. It's like, my top rose theory now is that they already have merged, like you think, because there's no one Blake just has the ability to do this by himself. So Blake kind of loops back around to this definition of harm, and Poos gets clearly quite pissed off. He was pretty set on messing with Blake, and Blake has kind of, found this loophole, and Poos is annoyed, but eventually they do get to a contract that they agree on.
Congrats, Blake. He popped his Diabolus cherry. Yeah,
there's this great quote. I love this quote. It's so good. It's such a good line. Poos says, Poos refers to Blake as a Diabolist, and Blake picks up and says, "Were you calling me a Diabolist before this?" "No," he said. He smiled. "Because you weren't, but you are one now, Like, fuck, that's such a good line. And it's just this moment of Blake. I think Blake kind of notices it as well, and it hits him pretty hard, like, oh shit, I've actually just turned into this thing that I swore I wasn't really going to be. Like, I swore to myself I wasn't going to become a Diabolist, and now I just am one.
Yeah, well, it's this great conflicting moment because Poos is basically saying, yeah, good job. But
yeah, totally.
also, now you're a terrible person.
Yeah.
It's a nice bit of like conflicting feelings. Yeah.
Yeah. So Blake has written this perfect contract, no traps, and Poos is bound. Yay! But now that he's bound, he can't control the animals, including Craig, creepily enough. And Blake is fucked again. Out of the frying pan, quickly divert to do some good contract negotiation, and then, back into the frying pan, Blake.
Yeah, I can't believe I didn't see this coming. Like, my first read through, I was just sort of shooting through, and then it happened, and I was like, oh, we had so many clues about the animals and their behaviors. Blake and I probably both should have seen this coming a bit. It's great. And then there's like this extra detail about like what he thinks might be a bear moving outside the window. So just in case you thought the rabbits and squirrels weren't bad enough, or Craig the zombie, there's a bear walking around outside apparently.
I'm curious what you think Poos is trying to get out of this trick. What do you think Poos gets out of this, Elliot?
Yeah, I did think about that because, ultimately he does sort of want this deal, but now he is bound, so maybe he's assuming even if Blake gets killed, Conquest will come and pick him up anyway. Like, it's just a bit of a... And, he's just a demon maniac, so maybe he can't help himself but try to fuck Blake over.
From fucking with people, yeah. I kind of see it as kind of a bit of a test. Like, that's how it comes across to me. Like, Poos is kind of putting himself in Blake's hands a lot, and so he doesn't want to do that if Blake is, shit at his job, because that obviously makes Poos in a lot of risk. So if Blake dies to these animals, then Poos just comes out in 2 days and he's back and he can kind of just continue as he was. Like, I kind of see it as Poos just testing the water for Blake a bit.
Yeah, I can see that. That would make sense. So before we round out the chapter, like that's how things end. I just wanted to bring up Rose because she obviously wasn't in this chapter. I was so excited to finish our recording of 4.6 and dive into 4.7 and get all the juicy details on Rose. And I didn't. But I had this theory, and I sort of shared it with you on Facebook, and you thought I should bring it here. I was wondering if Rose is maybe stuck in the house, like, back in Jacob's Bell.
The Hillsglade house.
Yeah, because I sort of thought of this because, Poos' whole deal is he inverts the natural order, and I was thinking, well, vestiges are normally fragile, right? So if he's inverting that, maybe he made her so not fragile that she became corporeal. And then maybe because she was created there, for some reason, she's back in the house, and now she's stuck in the time bubble.
Yeah, well, what do you make of what Poos says that she's asleep, basically, or in a coma? He kind of makes reference to her being asleep.
Yeah, so that's sort of why I've now already drifted away from my Rose is stuck in the house theory. Because also that's not horrendous enough. Like Poos, I think one of the biggest clues Poos gives us is that he's really excited for this to happen, and he wishes he could see Blake's face, which tells us that it's not good.
Well, probably. I think it is a little bit ambiguous as to whether, like, my first reading of this, my interpretation was kind of Poos throws out the Rose thing and is excited to see Blake realize, but he was referencing like his trap that he had laid, and the Rose thing is a bit of a distraction. But yeah, it could kind of go either way, I think.
That's true. I didn't even consider he wasn't talking about Rose. Yeah. Well, yeah. Anyway, I guess with all the coma stuff, Blake obviously links her being in some sort of equivalent of a sleep or in a coma to like healing, because Pooh's sort of is like, well, why do people go into comas? And the fact that Blake links it to healing makes me think that's a red herring and it's not a healing thing. Because I guess the obvious answer would just be she was hurt by Pooh's radiation, and so she's healing and she'll just awaken. Again, that's not horrific or anything. So I was thinking the only other reason I know that people were put in comas is like they're medically induced comas to prepare you for surgery. So I'm wondering if maybe Pooh's radiation kickstarted some sort of metaphorical transformative surgery type thing, like Rose is being essentially put under to be enhanced somehow. I don't know.
Do we know any Do we know any demons that have things to do with like cutting or surgery? I wonder.
Oh god, I hadn't even thought of that.
Oh shit! It's all coming together.
Yeah, my hype levels are just so high for this Rose mystery. Like I've completely raised my expectations, and I want to say next chapter, but I don't know. I just want to know the answer.
All right, we'll see. But that's the end of our discussion on Collateral 4.7. Now, you stuck a little bit of extra bonus bit in there about our Rose speculation, but I did want to kind of talk about Andrus, the demon that is mentioned as the kind of papa of Poos.
The metaphorical tree, I believe, is the term that's used.
Yes, very flowery language from Poos there. I love kind of diving into demons that are referred to once with a name and figuring out where this name comes from. So I started looking up Andrus, the demon, to see where I could find this reference. And he exists. He's a demon featured in this kind of compilation of like demonology materials that are known as the Lesser Key of Solomon. Again, I don't know what it is, but like all these demonology books are based around Solomon going around sealing up demons and using their power. And this is another one of those, basically.
I guess Andrus, it's just because, like, I mean, I'm just sort of assuming here, but demon literature is probably usually at its highest in places of, like, Abrahamic faith, because, you know, they're such integral parts of, or what we're talking about as demons are such integral, you know, sort of associated with Abrahamic religions. So it's probably just that. Like, Solomon's obviously a big part of the Old Testament. Makes sense. That's probably that link, yeah.
Yeah, so Andros is the first demon named in this book called the Ars Goetia, which is the first of 5 books in this Lesser Key of Solomon. The Ars Goetia is basically just a textbook that lists 72 demons bound by Solomon and gives like their stats, basically.
So it's a Pokedex.
Yeah, it's like a little Pokedex of the demons that Solomon bound.
Okay.
And they all have like military rankings of their kind of positions that they took in hell. So
that's
the 72
very anime.
Demons. Yeah, it's very anime. Of the 72 demons, there were 9 kings, and you recognize names like Baal and Belial, and a demon named Paimon, who was like the antagonist of that Toni Collette movie Hereditary that came out recently. Really good movie. Everyone should check it out. So there were 9 kings. There were 23 dukes, including one called Valifor, which is a fun little worm reference. There were 7 princes, including one called Seer. Again, I'm starting to see a trend from where the fallen names came from in Ward. There were 15 marquises, including Andros, and we'll loop back around to him later. There were 5 counts. Furfur was one of these counts. There was 1 knight, only 1. I'm not sure why. And there were 12 presidents, which is a weird name for a demon to have. It just feels a bit too stately.
Yeah, I guess these are probably just like weird, artifacts of translating them, I guess.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
I like the idea of the 1 knight. It's like, it feels like that situation where like they knew he was too good to be a president, but you know, he wasn't good enough to be a count, so they created a position for him.
Yeah. I love the presidents. There's one, my favorite of them. There's one called Cameo, and he's just depicted as a bird with a sword. And I've posted an image in our show notes for you to look at, Elliot. He's actually just a bird holding a sword. It's so bizarre. I love
truly terrifying.
For those of you at home, imagine just like a raven standing there, but in one of its little talons, it's holding a sword, and that's what it looks like.
Well, no, it's got talons coming out of its wings.
It's got like 4 wing talons. Yeah.
Yeah. It's bizarre.
So diving back to Andros, he's obviously mentioned as being bound to a saber in Pact, at least. And this seems to come from his description, which has him like flourishing a saber. And you would think that that's not that unique, like swords, you know, common enough. But actually only 3 of the 72 demons are like described with swords. So it is relatively unique.
I mean, knowing Pact, it totally adds up that if he's a demon already associated with swords, it'd be easier to bind him to one. So,
yeah. Well, There's. I'll give you some other fast facts about Andros. He has the body of a winged angel and the head of an owl, which in depictions of him is very creepy. He's considered highly dangerous to summon and can kill the conjurer if not very careful. So obviously there's a bit of a backstory behind whoever bound him to this sword.
Yeah.
And he's often depicted riding a black wolf. And
That's pretty cool.
The Ars Goetia is basically just a textbook with facts and descriptions. So there's no kind of like backstory behind Andros in it that I could find at least. And so there isn't much to go off of relating to like poos or spawning children or the fifth choir or all of that stuff that seems to be kind of extrapolated into Pact. He's depicted riding a black wolf. I don't know, that's kind of an animal link. And he was also mentioned as being in command of 30 legions, which is vague, but maybe that's where the idea of like siring poos came from. But yeah.
Like legions could just be referring to imps in Pact, basically.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Anyway, a little dive into a demon that's only mentioned by name. And I always find it fun diving into these weird demonology books because it's so just like, it's just like spawned from the head of anonymous authors. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like a universe that's had fan fiction that's been going for hundreds of years. So there's just a ton of content with true. Really, it's like comic books as well. When you got all these authors adding to lore over hundreds of years, it gets pretty wacky.
Yeah, I guess it's basically like the edgy Sonic OC, but for the Bible, right? Yeah. And with that interesting thought, that's the end of our discussion on Collateral 4.7. Thank you for listening to the show. If you wanna connect with us, you can check out our Twitter, which is MediaMD Podcast. At MediaMD Podcast. You can chat to us there.
Yes, but you can chat to everyone, including us, even more on our Reddit discussion thread, which will be in the show notes below.
And you can chat to everyone, including us, even more, and some of the other shows on the Doof Network on our website, which is doofmedia.com.
Speaking of Doof Media, we also have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/doofmedia. And donating there helps support us and all the other great shows on the Doof Network.
Yes, and if you're in a giving mood, you can also check out Wildbow's Patreon, patreon.com/Wildbow. Chuck Wildbow some money for, making all these awesome stories. I know I do, and you should too.
And of course, yesterday we also just released an episode of our other podcast, Media MD, which features Matt Freeman, who of course, Doof listeners will know as the F part of Doof.
Yep, the big F in Doof. We were talking with him about Pulp Fiction, which he said was his favourite Tarantino movie. We had a fun discussion about that went for a long time. But yes. Yeah, it was a good episode, and I highly recommend checking it out if you want to talk about Pulp Fiction or other kind of Tarantino stylings.
Yeah, absolutely. And so apart from that, we'll see everyone on Friday the 22nd of March for Chapter 4.8.
Yep, see you then.